Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. We are reading from Canto 1, Chapter 9, Passing Away of Bhishmadeva in the Presence of Lord Krishna. We are going to be reading from verse 26 onwards today. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langate girim. Yadkripatamam vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Padmanantamadhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Hari Om Tat Sat. Translation verse 26. At Maharaj Yudhishthir's inquiry, Bhishmadeva first defined all the classifications of castes and orders of life in terms of the individual's qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold divisions, described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. Purport: the conception of 4 castes and 4 orders of life as planned by the Lord himself, Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 4, verse 13, is to accelerate transcendental qualities of the individual person so that he may gradually realize his spiritual identity and thus act accordingly to get free from the material bondage or conditional life. In almost all the Puranas, the subject matter is described in the same spirit, and so also in the Mahabharata. It is more elaborately described by Bhishmadev in the Shanti Parv, beginning from the 60th chapter. The Varnashram Dharma is prescribed for the civilized human being just to train him to successfully terminate human life. Self-realization is distinguished from the life of the lower animals engaged in eating, sleeping, fearing and mating. Bhishmadev advised for all human beings 9 qualifications: not to become angry, not to lie, to equally distribute wealth, to forgive, to beget children only by one's legitimate wife, to be pure in mind and hygienic in body, not to be inimical toward anyone, to be simple, and to support servants or subordinates. One cannot be called a civilized person without acquiring the above-mentioned preliminary qualities. Besides these, the Brahmanas, the intelligent men, the administrative men, the mercantile community, and the laborer class must acquire special qualities in terms of occupational duties mentioned in all the Vedic scriptures. For the intelligent man, controlling the senses is the most essential qualification. It is the basis of morality. Sex indulgence, even with a legitimate wife, must also be controlled, and thereby family control will automatically follow. An intelligent man abuses his great qualifications if he does not follow the Vedic way of life. This means he must seriously make a study of the Vedic literature, especially of Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad-Gita. For learning Vedic knowledge, one must approach a person who is 100% engaged in devotional service. He must not do things which are forbidden in the Shastras. A person cannot be a teacher if he drinks or smokes. In the modern system of education, the teacher's academic qualification is taken into consideration without evaluation of his moral life. Therefore, the result of education is misuse of high intelligence in so many ways. The Kshatriya, the member of the administrative class, is especially advised to give charity and not to accept charity in any circumstances. Modern administrators raise subscriptions for some political functions but never give charity to the citizens in any state function. It is just the reverse in the injunctions of the Shastras. The administrative class must be well versed in the Shastras but must not take to the profession of teachers. The administrators should never pretend to become non-violent and thereby go to hell. When Arjun wanted to become non-violent, cowered on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he was severely chastised by Lord Krishna. The Lord degraded Arjuna at that time to the status of an uncivilized man for his avowed acceptance of the cult of non-violence. The administrative class must be personally trained in military education. Cowards should not be elevated to the presidential throne by dint of numerical votes only. The monarchs were all chivalrous personalities, and therefore monarchy should be maintained provided the monarch is regularly trained in the occupational duties of a king. In fighting, the king or the president should never return home without being hurt by the enemy. The so-called king of today never visits the war field. He is very much expert in artificially encouraging the fighting strength in the hope of false national prestige. As soon as the administrative class is turned into a gang of mercantile and laborer men, the whole machinery of government becomes polluted. The Vaishyas, the members of the mercantile communities, are especially advised to protect the cows. Cow protection means increasing the milk productions, namely curd and butter. Agriculture and distribution of the foodstuff are the primary duties of the mercantile community, backed by education in Vedic knowledge and trained to give in charity. As the Kshatriyas were given charge of the protection of the citizens, Vaishyas were given the charge of the protection of animals. Animals are never meant to be killed. Killing of animals is a symptom of barbarian society. For a human being, agricultural produce, fruits and milk are sufficient and compatible foodstuffs. The human society should give more attention to animal protection. The productive energy of the laborer is misused when he is occupied by industrial enterprises. Industry of various types cannot produce the essential needs of a man, namely rice, wheat, grains, milk, fruits and vegetables. The production of machines and machine tools increase the artificial living fashion of a class of vested interests and keeps thousands of men in starvation and unrest. This should not be the standard of civilization. The Shudra class is less intelligent and should have no independence. They are meant for rendering service, sincere service to the three higher sections of the society. The Shudra class can attain all comforts of life simply by rendering service to the high classes. It is especially enjoined that the Shudra class should never bank money. As soon as the Shudras accumulate wealth, it will be misused for sinful activities in wine, women and gambling. Wine, women and gambling indicate that the population is degraded to less than Shudra quality. The higher caste should always look after the maintenance of the Shudras and they should provide them with old and used garments. A Shudra should never leave his master when the master is old and invalid, and the master should keep the servant satisfied in all respects. The Shudras must first of all be satisfied by sumptuous food and clothing before any sacrifice is performed. In this age, so many functions are held by spending millions, but the poor laborer is not sumptuously fed or given charity, clothing, etc. The laborers are dissatisfied and so they make agitation. The Varnas are, so to speak, classification of different occupations, and ashram dharma is gradually progress on the path of self-realization. Both are interrelated and one is dependent on the other. The main purpose of ashram dharma is to awaken knowledge and detachment. The brahmachari ashram is the training ground for the prospective candidates. In this ashram, it is instructed that this material world is not actually the home of the living being. The conditioned souls under material bondage are prisoners of matter, and therefore self-realization is the ultimate aim of life. The whole system of ashram dharma is means to detachment. One who fails to assimilate this spirit of detachment is allowed to enter into family life with the same spirit of detachment. Therefore, one who attains detachment may at once adopt the fourth order, namely renounced order, and thus live on charity only, not to accumulate wealth, but just to keep body and soul together for ultimate realization. Household life is for one who is attached, and the Vanaprastha and Sannyas orders of life are for those who are detached from the material world. The Brahmachari ashram is especially meant for training both the attached and the detached. Verse 27, it's another verse with a very long purport. Translation: He then explained by divisions acts of charity, the pragmatic activities of a king and activities for salvation. Then he described the duties of women and devotees both briefly and extensively. Purport: To give charity is one of the householder's main functions, and he should be prepared to give in charity at least 50% of his hard-earned money. A brahmachari or student should perform sacrifices, a householder should give charity, and a person in the retired life or in the renounced order should practice penances and austerities. Those are the general functions of all the ashrams in order of the orders of life on the path of self-realization. In the brahmachari life, the training is sufficiently imparted so that one may understand that the world as property belongs to the Supreme Lord and the personality of Godhead. No one therefore can claim to be the proprietor of anything in the world. Therefore, in the life of a householder, which is sort of license for sex enjoyment, one must give in charity for the service of the Lord. Everyone's energy is generated or borrowed from the reservoir of energy of the Lord. Therefore, the resultant actions of such energy must be given to the Lord in the shape of transcendental loving service for Him, as the rivers draw water from the sea through the clouds and again go down to the sea. Similarly, our energy is borrowed from the Supreme Source the Lord's energy, and it must return to the Lord. That is the perfection of our energy. The Lord, therefore, in the Bhagavad-Gita 9.27 says that whatever we do, whatever we undergo as penance, whatever we sacrifice, whatever we eat or whatever we give in charity must be offered to Him. That is the way of utilizing our borrowed energy. When our energy is utilized in that way, our energy is purified from the contamination of material inebrities, and thus we become fit for our original nature, natural life of service to the Lord. Rajdharma is a great science. Unlike modern diplomacy for political supremacy, the kings were trained systematically to become munificent and not merely be tax collectors. They were trained to perform different sacrifices only for the prosperity of the subjects. To lead the prajas to the attainment of salvation was great duty of the king. The father, the spiritual master, and the king are not to become irresponsible in the matter of leading their subjects to the path of ultimate liberation from birth, death, diseases, and old age. When these primary duties are properly discharged, there is no need of government for of the people by the people. In the modern days, the people in general occupy the administration by the strength of manipulated votes, but they are never trained in the primary duties of the king, and that is also not possible for everyone. Under the circumstances, the untrained administrators play havoc to make the subjects happy in all respects. On the other hand, these untrained administrators gradually become rogues and thieves and increase the taxation to finance a top-heavy administration that is useless for all purposes. Actually, the qualified brahmanas are meant to give direction to the king for proper administration in terms of the scriptures like the Manu Samhita and Dharma Shastras of Parashar. A typical king is the ideal of the people in general, and if the king is pious, religious, chivalrous, and munificent, the citizens generally follow him. Such a king is not a lazy, sensuous person, living at the cost of the subjects, but alert always to kill thieves and dacoits. The pious kings were not merciful to dacoits and thieves in the name of nonsensical ahimsa, that is the non-violence. The thieves and dacoits were punished in an exemplary way so that in the future no one would dare to commit such nuisances in an organized form. Such thieves and dacoits were never meant for administration as they are now. The taxation law was simple. There was no force, no encroachment. The king had the right to take 1/4 of the production made by the subject. The king had a right to claim 1/4 of one's allotted wealth. One would never grudge parting with it because due to the pious king and religious harmony, there was enough natural wealth, namely grains, fruits, flowers, silk, cotton, milk, jewels, minerals, etc., and therefore no one was materially unhappy. The citizens were rich in agriculture and animal husbandry, and therefore they had enough grains, fruits, and milk without any artificial needs of soaps and toilets, cinemas, and bars. The king had to see that the reserved energy of humanity was properly utilized. Human energy is meant not exactly for fulfilling one's animal propensity, but for self-realization. The whole government was specifically designed to fulfill this particular purpose. As such, the king had to select properly the cabinet ministers, but not on the strength of voting background. The ministers, the military commanders, and even the ordinary soldiers were all selected by personal qualification, and the king had to supervise them properly before they were appointed to their respective posts. The king was especially vigilant to see that the tapasvis, or persons who sacrificed everything for disseminating spiritual knowledge, were never disregarded. The king knew well that the Supreme Personality of Godhead never tolerates any insult to his unalloyed devotees. Such tapasvis were trusted leaders even of the rogues and thieves who would never disobey the orders of tapasvis. The king would give special protection to illiterates, the helpless, and the widows of the state. Defense measures were arranged previously to any attack by the enemies. The taxing process was easy, and it was not meant for squandering, but was for strengthening the reserve fund. The soldiers were recruited from all parts of the world, and they were trained for special duties. As far as salvation is concerned, no one has to conquer the principles of lust, anger, unlawful desires, avarice, and bewilderment. To get freedom from anger, one should learn how to forgive. To be free from unlawful desires, one should not make plans. The spiritual culture one is able to conquer. By spiritual culture, one is able to conquer sleep. By tolerance, only one can conquer desire and avarice. Disturbances from various diseases can be avoided by regulated diets. By self-control, one can be free from false hopes, and money can be saved by avoiding undesirable association. By practice of yoga, one can control hunger, and worldliness can be avoided by culturing the knowledge of impermanence. Dizziness can be conquered by rising up, and false arguments can be conquered by factual ascertainment. Talkativeness can be avoided by gravity and silence, and by prowess, one can avoid fearfulness. Perfect knowledge can be obtained by self-cultivation. One must be free from lust, avarice, anger, dreaming, etc. to actually attain the path of salvation. As far as the women class are concerned, they are accepted as a power of inspiration for men. As such, women are more powerful than men. Mighty Julius Caesar was controlled by a Cleopatra. Such powerful women are controlled by shyness. Therefore, shyness is important for women. Once this control valve is loosened, women can create havoc in the society by adultery. Adultery means production of unwanted children known as Varnashankar, who disturb the world. The last item told by Bhishmadeva was the process of pleasing the Lord. We are all eternal servants of the Lord, and when we forget this essential part of our nature, we are put into material conditions of life. The simple process of pleasing the Lord for the householders especially is to install the deity of the Lord at home. By concentrating on the deity, one may progressively go on with the daily routine work. Worshipping the deity at home, serving the devotee, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, residing in a holy place, and chanting the holy name of the Lord are all inexpensive items which can please the Lord. Thus the subject matter was explained by the grandfather to his grandchildren. Verse 28, translation. Then he described the occupational duties of different orders and statuses of life, citing instances from history, for he was himself well acquainted with the truth, purport. Incidents mentioned in the Vedic literature such as Puranas, Mahabharats and Ramayana are factual historical narrations that took place sometime in the past, although not in the chronological order. Such historical facts, being instructive for ordinary men, were assorted without chronological reference. Beside that, they happen on different planets, nay, in different universes, and thus the description of the narrations is sometimes measured by 3 dimensions. We are simply concerned with the instructive lessons of such incidents. Even though they are not in order by our limited range of understanding, Bhishmadev describes such narrations before Maharaj Yudhishthir in reply to his different questions. Verse 29, translation. While Bhishmadev was describing occupational duties, the sun's course ran into the northern hemisphere. This period is desired by mystics who die at their will. Purport. The perfect yogis or mystics can leave the material body at their own sweet will at a suitable time and go to a suitable planet desired by them. In the Bhagavad-Gita 8.24, it is said that self-realized souls who have exactly identified themselves with the interest of the Supreme Lord can generally leave the material body during the time of the fire god's effulgence and when the sun is in the northern horizon, and thus achieve the transcendental sky. In the Vedas, these times are considered auspicious for quitting the body, and they are taken advantage of by the expert mystics who have perfected the system. Perfection of yoga means attainment of such supermental states as to be able to leave the material body as desires. Yogis can also reach any planet within no time without a material vehicle. The yogis can reach the highest planetary system within a very short time, and this is impossible for the materialists. Even attempting to reach the highest planet will take millions of years at a speed of millions of miles per hour. This is a different science, and Bhishmadev knew well how to utilize it. He was just waiting for the suitable moment to quit his material body, and the golden opportunity arrived when he was instructing his noble grandsons, the Pandavas. He thus prepared himself to quit his body before the exalted Lord Sri Krishna, the pious Pandavas, and the great sages, headed by Bhagwan, Vyasa, etc., all great soul. Verse 30, translation. Thereupon that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings and who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men stopped speaking, and being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide open eyes upon the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who stood before him four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined purport. In the momentous hour of leaving his material body, Bhishmadev set the glorious example concerning the important function of the human form of life. The subject matter which attracts a dying man becomes the beginning of his next life. Therefore, if one is absorbed in the thoughts of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, he is sure to go back to Godhead without any doubt. This is confirmed in Bhagavad-Gita. And whoever at the time of death quits his body remembering me, this is the verse 5 of Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 8. And whoever at the time of death quits his body remembering me alone at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. Verse 6, chapter 8 of Bhagavad-Gita. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. Verse 7, therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at that same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting with your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed upon me. You will attain me without doubt. Bhagavad-Gita chapter 8 verse 8, he who meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path. He, O Partha, that is Arjun, is sure to reach me. Verse 9, Bhagavad-Gita chapter 8, one should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as who is the oldest, who is the controller, and who is the smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and being transcendental is beyond this material nature. Bhagavad-Gita chapter 8 verse 10, one who at the time of death fixes his life here between the eyebrows and in full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Verse 11, Bhagavad-Gita chapter 8, persons learned in the Vedas who utter Omkara and who are great sages in the renounced orders enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Verse 12, the yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all the doors of the senses and fixing the mind on the heart and the life air at the top of the head. One establishes himself in yoga. Bhagavad-Gita chapter 8 verse 13, after being situated in this yoga practice, the vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. Verse 14, for one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Partha, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. And finally, verse 15 of Bhagavad-Gita chapter 8, after attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection. Shri Bhishmadev attained the perfection of quitting his body at will and was fortunate enough to have Lord Krishna, the object of his attention, personally present at the time of death. He therefore fixed his open eyes upon him. He wanted to see Shri Krishna for a long time out of his spontaneous love for him, because he was a pure devotee. He had very little to do with the detailed performance of yogic principles. Simple bhakti yoga is enough to bring about perfection. Therefore, the ardent desire of Bhishmadev was to see the person of Lord Krishna, the most lovable object, and by the grace of Lord, Shri Bhishmadev had this opportunity at the last stage of his breathing. Verse 31, translation, Canto 1, chapter 9, by pure meditation, looking at Lord Krishna, he at once was freed from all material inauspiciousness and was relieved of all bodily pains caused by the arrow wounds. Thus all the external activities of his senses at once stopped, and he prayed transcendentally to the controller of all living beings while quitting his material body. Purport: the material body is a gift of the material energy, technically called illusion. Identification with the material body is due to forgetfulness of our eternal relationship with the Lord. For a pure devotee of the Lord like Bhishmadev, this illusion was at once removed as soon as the Lord arrived. Lord Krishna is like the sun, and the illusory external material energy is like darkness. In the presence of the sun, there is no possibility that darkness can stand. Therefore, just on the arrival of Lord Krishna, all material contamination was completely removed, and Bhishmadev was thus able to be transcendentally situated by stopping the activities of the impure senses in collaboration with matter. The soul is originally pure, and so also the senses. By material contamination, the senses assume the role of imperfection and impurity. By revival of contact with the Supreme Pure and Lord Krishna, the senses again become freed from material contaminations. Bhishmadeva attained all these transcendental conditions prior to his leaving the material body because of the Lord's presence. The Lord is the controller and benefactor of all living beings. That is the verdict of all Vedas. He is the supreme eternity and living entity amongst all the eternal beings, and He alone provides all the necessities for all kinds of living beings. Thus He provided all facilities to fulfill the transcendental desires of its great devotee Bhishmadev, who prayed as follows. Verse 32, translation. Bhishmadev said, "Let me now invest my thinking, feeling and willing, which were so long engaged in different subjects and occupational duties, in the all-powerful Lord Sri Krishna. He is always self-satisfied, but sometimes, being the leader of the devotees, he enjoys transcendental pleasure by descending to the material world, although from him only the material world is created." Purport: because Bhishmadev was a statesman, the head of the Kuru dynasty, a great general and a leader of Kshatriyas, his mind was strewn over so many subjects, and his thinking, feeling and willing were engaged in different matters. Now, in order to achieve pure devotional service, he wanted to invest all powers of thinking, feeling and willing entirely in the Supreme Being, Lord Krishna. He is described herein as the leader of the devotees and all-powerful. Although Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, He himself descends to earth to bestow upon his pure devotees the boon of devotional service. He descends sometimes as Lord Krishna, as he is, and sometimes as Lord Chaitanya. Both are leaders of the pure devotees. Pure devotees of the Lord have no desire other than the service of the Lord, and therefore they are called Sattvata. The Lord is the chief among such Sattvatas. Bhishmadev therefore had no other desire. Unless one is purified from all sorts of material desires, the Lord does not become one's leader. Desires cannot be wiped out, but they have only to be purified. It is confirmed in the Bhagavad-Gita, verse 10, chapter 10, by the Lord himself, that he gives his instruction from within the heart of a pure devotee who is constantly engaged in the service of the Lord. Such instruction is given not for any material purpose, but for only going back home, back to Godhead. For the ordinary man who wants to lord it over material nature, the Lord only sanctions and becomes a witness of activities, but he never gives the non-devotee instructions for going back to Godhead. That is the difference in dealing by the Lord with different living beings, both the devotee and the non-devotee. He is the leader of all the living beings. As the king of the state rules both the prisoners and the free citizens, but his dealings are different in terms of devotee and non-devotee. Non-devotees never care to take any instruction from the Lord, and therefore the Lord is silent in their case. Although he witnesses all their activities and awards them the necessary results, good or bad, the devotees are above this material goodness and badness. They are progressive on the path of transcendence, and therefore they have no desire for anything material. The devotee also knows Sri Krishna as the original Narayan, because Lord Sri Krishna by his plenary portion appears as the Karanodakshai Vishnu, the original source of all material creation. The Lord also desires the association of his pure devotees, and for them only the Lord descends to the earth and enlivens them. The Lord appears out of his own will. He is not forced by the conditions of material nature. He is therefore described here as the Vibhu, or the Almighty, for he is never conditioned by the laws of material nature. We will continue with the remaining verses of chapter 9, Passing of Bhishmadeva in the presence of Lord Krishna, from Canto 1 of Srimad Bhagavatam, next time. Thank you for joining. Hari Om Tat Sat, Hare Krishna. And today Bhishmapanchaka also ends, and today is the last day of the Kartik month of year 2021. Hope you all had very good time absorbing yourselves in the reading, hearing, chanting, and contemplating on the, contemplating is the right word or not, I don't know, thinking about the pastimes of Lord Krishna. Hare Krishna.